The escape from Alcatraz, the Skinwalker Ranch, and the Toxic Lady are all unsolved US mysteries that we're going to cover in this video that you've probably at least heard of. But I've got 12 others that we're going to cover in this video also that you probably haven't. This is the US Unsolved Mysteries Iceberg series part 2, but you can jump in at any point and be just fine. Just go watch the first part after this video. Join me right now as we cover the most well-known unsolved mystery on this list today, Skinwalker Ranch. Skinwalker Ranch itself is a 512-acre plot of land south of Ballard, Utah that has paranormal connections dating all the way back to when the Navajo controlled the area. The ranch was basically the border between the Ute natives and the Navajo, and after a lot of fights and skirmishes over the years, the Navajo cursed the entire area. As a result, the legend of the skinwalkers on the ranch began. Now, if you live under a rock and you don't know what a skinwalker is, it's basically like a witch or shaman from Navajo legend that can use dark magic and turn itself into like an animal or a human or a strange conglomeration of the two. They're super creepy and they're one of the top cryptids basically in America. Alright, so as we said, the creepy beginnings of the ranch date all the way back to those days, but the modern paranoia began in the 1970s whenever there were supposed UFO sightings. Fast forward to the 90s and now Gwen and Terry Sherman own the ranch and they're going to be very important. They bought the ranch and named it Sherman Ranch after themselves, and that's when weird stuff started happening to them. They had cattle mutilations going on, so like they would go out on their ranch and they would find a dead cow, and I understand that, I'm a farmer, sometimes you just find dead cows. But these weren't normal dead cows, they were surgically dissected. The thing is, there wasn't any blood or any tracks anywhere near the cows, so it's gotta be a skinwalker, right? Anyway, they also saw and shot at massive wolves that were completely unharmed by the bullets, like their bullets would just bounce off them or go through them or something. They really don't know what was going on there. They also thought they had ghosts in their home because doors would be slamming all the time. Now you could say that might be wind, but if they're internal doors and all the external doors were shut, doors slamming all the time is weird and paranormal. Only 2 years after buying the Sherman Ranch, they sold it to a billionaire named Robert Bigelow who wanted to investigate all these paranormal goings on. He founded an entire research company to investigate the happenings on Skinwalker Ranch. Now this research company never came to a decisive conclusion as to whether or not the paranormal activity was actually paranormal activity or if it was just paranoia, but they did have some serious technical malfunctions right before they would find something, most likely any other time. Like their cameras would completely brick while they were trying to record something about to happen, or their batteries would drain on the cameras, something like that. They never caught anything on film. In 2016, Bigelow sold the ranch to another rich guy, Brandon Fugel, who commercialized the investigation of the ranch. He started the Secrets of the Skinwalker Ranch on History Channel, that show. So what's really going on out there? I don't know. Theories range from the land being actually cursed by the Navajo to there being an interdimensional portal on the ranch to it just being mass paranoia. I'll tell you one thing for sure, and that's that I will not be investigating the Skinwalker Ranch. Michele Miscavige is the wife of the current leader of the Church of Scientology, David Miscavige, who disappeared from the eye of the public in 2007. Since then, missing persons reports have been filed, but they've been dismissed by the police as unfounded despite the fact that she hasn't been seen by the public in nearly 20 years. Michele was an early convert of Scientology, and she eventually married David to become the first lady of Scientology. Now, David is not a good guy by any stretch of the imagination. He's been named in allegations and lawsuits against the Church of Scientology for like horrible stuff like human trafficking, child abuse, SA, and even slavery. And it's 2025. Slavery? Now, none of these investigations have actually found enough to put him away, but I feel like in about 10 to 20 years we're gonna have a massive documentary about the horrors of the cult of Scientology, but that's just me. I feel like he has enough political power and pull, like he is a puppet master. I don't think he's gonna get in trouble for anything until he's dead. Anyway, in 1985, just 3 years after Shelley married David, her mother Mary was found dead, shot once to the head, 3 times to the chest, and with wrist cuts, and law enforcement said that she took her own life. Now, I get that the wrist cuts make it look like she might have taken her own life, but how do you shoot yourself 3 times in the chest and then once in the head and then die? Like, how would you do that? There's simply no way in my mind. Now, David claimed to have nothing to do with her death, but in private, he told somebody that blank got what she deserved. Oh yeah, one thing I forgot to mention earlier whenever I was talking about all his allegations, one was that he forcefully separated people from their families. Now, if he would do it to all these random people, why wouldn't he do it to his wife whenever he hated his wife's mother? He would have her taken out of the equation. That's also just my opinion, but I think it makes sense. Well, after that, the years go by, and in 2007, Shelley's dad dies. After his funeral in 2007, she was never seen again in public. Church leaders claim that she's fine and she's in the backgrounds working for the Church of Scientology, David doesn't comment on the matter, but the police themselves say that she's fine. So is she being held against her will? Is she dead? Or is she just so brainwashed by the cult of Scientology that she's willing to live a complete private life out of the eyes of everybody in service of the cult? We really don't know, but we will one day. For now, I'm just gonna hope that she's the crazy one and she's willing to live that life in secrecy for herself, for the cult, you know, because otherwise it's just really sad. Just real quick, thank you a ton for watching. It means more to me than you will ever know. If you're enjoying this video, hit that subscribe button. It helps me out a lot. And now, let's get back into it. The Max Headroom Incident refers to a broadcast hijacking in the 1980s that's very akin to an analog horror film. On November 22nd, 1987, two different Chicago TV stations were hijacked by a guy wearing a Max Headroom mask. He hijacked the broadcast, says a bunch of random stuff that doesn't really make sense, mumbles some more, dances around, and ends the broadcast. It was absolutely insane, and that was all that ever came of it. Now, if you're wondering what a Max Headroom mask was, don't worry, I was too. Max Headroom was a satirical, glitchy TV host type character that was supposed to be an AI, and he looked like this. The hacker wearing the Max Headroom mask would kind of glitch around as he was dancing around, and it would just add to the creepy factor. The FBI and the FCC investigated this, but nothing ever came of it. They never found anybody. The thing about this was, in the 80s, it was way harder to do something like this than it is nowadays. The culprit would need a very powerful microwave transmitter, a clear line of sight to the towers that the stuff pinged off of, and he would need very precise timing so he didn't get caught. It was a meticulously planned operation, kind of similar to something that the Joker would do in Gotham, and I'm not kidding. Now, speculation as to why this actually happened falls mostly on a protest of the media and the surveillance and the Big Brother type stuff that was going on in the 80s. Everybody thought the government and the media was infringing on stuff, and boy oh boy, if those people saw the world today, they would have I don't know, a panic attack. It was a precursor to the anonymous hacker group, and in a way, I think it kind of inspired them. Now, we'll probably never know the exact reason behind the broadcast hijackings, but we do know that it inspired real life and cartoon imitations, so whatever its purposes were, it probably succeeded. The Babushka Lady was a woman caught on film holding a camera at the JFK assassination scene. She was wearing a trench coat and an Eastern European style headscarf, which is where she gets the name Babushka Lady, and she was seen filming the JFK motorcade the entire time it was moving, like during assassination and all. So like I said, even as the shots were ringing out and JFK's head did that thing, she was seen holding the camera, filming the motorcade as it goes by the entire time. But the thing about this is, this film was never found, and this woman was never found either. Now, the government and media desperately want this footage because it would actually reveal stuff about what happened. It would give another perspective from the Zapruder film, but it's just not there. She never came forward, or she did, but the government buried the footage because it was too incriminating. Or was she someone on the inside to begin with? We really don't know. In 1970, a woman named Beverly Oliver came forward and claimed to be the Babushka Lady. She said she was 17 at the time and she brought a Super 8 Yashica camera to film JFK's motorcade, but later she turned the footage over to two dudes claiming to be FBI agents. They said they'd return the footage to her after they copied it or whatever they were going to do with it, but they never came back. She never heard from them again, so if she was the Babushka Lady, she got. She was probably lying anyway because that model of camera didn't come out until like a year after the JFK assassination, and the rest of her story was full of holes as well. If she was the Babushka Lady that filmed, she made up the rest of the story, so I just feel like she wasn't in general. So I guess it could have been Beverly, it could have been some random lady, it could have been an undercover Fed, or it even could have been a Soviet spy as the Babushka indicated. We'll never know, probably. Despite the fact that the JFK files came out earlier this year, there's still tons of mysteries surrounding the case that I feel like us average Joes will just never hear the answers to. The 1962 Alcatraz escape was the only successful escape from the seemingly impenetrable fortress that was the prison of Alcatraz. Fort Alcatraz was originally built as a military base on the island 1¼ miles off the coast of San Francisco, California. It was originally built in 1859, but later it was converted from a military base into a military prison for Confederate soldiers. In 1934, they changed it once again to become a maximum security prison. It is a 500-foot foot long concrete jailhouse that could hold up to 336 prisoners. It held the worst of the worst, like Al Capone and the real Machine Gun Kelly, because even if they did escape the prison walls, they would have to swim over a mile to the coast to actually escape. Anyway, on June 11th, 1962, 3 men actually escaped from Alcatraz, though there was a fourth that tried. Frank Morris, Alan West, and the brothers Clarence and John Anglin used makeshift tools to dig out of the prison. What they would do, they would use a stolen spoon and a jerry-rigged broken vacuum cleaner motor that they converted into a little drill to drill out holes in the backs of their prison cells. They would dig out these little holes in like a rectangular pattern, and then they were basically going to punch in the hole that they had dug so that they could make a massive hole that they could crawl out the back of. They worked for over 6 months to accomplish this, and in the meantime they would cover up the holes with like cardboard or a suitcase or whatever they had on hand. When the night of their escape came, they made paper mache heads and placed them in their beds so that they would like fool the prison guards into thinking that they were still in their cells overnight. Somehow this actually worked. When it came to escaping on the water, they gathered up 50 raincoats and kind of stitched and melted them together to form a makeshift raft. And they formed wooden paddles so that they could paddle their way to shore. That night, it was go time. Frank and the Anglin brothers went on, but sadly for him, Alan's hole in the wall wasn't big enough, so he had to stay behind. He would later cooperate with the authorities and tell them how the others escaped, but not until the others were long gone. Nobody ever saw these 3 men again, and the FBI and Coast Guard searches along the water concluded that they must have drowned while they were swimming to the mainland. Their bodies were never actually found though, and several people came forward to claim that these people made it to South America. The Anglin family claims to receive cards and photographs from the brothers in Brazil, and several forensic experts have examined this stuff and said that these photos and these cards are real and they're from them. Another man was lying on his deathbed whenever he told the authorities that he helped these 3 get to South America. In 2013, the FBI themselves received a letter from supposedly John Anglin requesting medical treatment in exchange for his surrender. We really don't know if this was real or not because the FBI didn't say one way or another. So did they escape and live? I honestly don't know. I honestly think they did, but I have a theory. They said that Frank Morris was the mastermind behind the plan, like he figured out how to hollow out the walls and kick them in. So I think that the brothers used his expertise and genius to get out of the prison, but while they were on their little life raft, they just pushed him overboard. The only reason I say this is because we never hear any more about Frank Morris at all, but we hear a lot about these Anglin brothers. It just seems like something that a pair of the worst brothers that were in Alcatraz would have done. Let me know what you think happened to all 3 of them in the comments down below. The Tomb of the Unknown Soldier is the burial site of an unknown soldier who served the US in World War I. The site is in Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia, and it's gone on to house the burial sites of unknown soldiers from World War II and Korea as well. Alright, so after World War I, several European countries established burial sites for unknown soldiers. It's kind of a memorial deal. The US followed suit in 1921 and established a single grave site that represented all of those unknown fallen in World War I. The monument in the cemetery reads, "Here rests in honored glory an American soldier known but to God." The soldier was laid to rest on Memorial Day in 1921, which is relevant because I wrote this script on Memorial Day 2025. Later on, the unidentified remains of soldiers that served in World War II and the Korean Wars would be buried in adjunct graves, as was one from the Vietnam War. This Vietnam soldier caused a great fuss because he wasn't truly unidentified. They had an idea of who he was, and rightfully so. The family wanted to check the body and see if that was who it was. Well, it was that guy, so his family obviously wanted his body moved from that grave to his hometown cemetery, and he was. The Tomb of the Unknown Soldier is guarded 24/7 by volunteer members of the US military that serve in the 3rd Infantry Regiment, aka the Old Guard. The Breyman Fountain is an outdoor water fountain in Salem, Oregon that is shrouded in mystery due to its possible occult origins. The fountain was donated to the city by Werner Breyman, who was a German immigrant and an elite businessman that moved to the area. It's in a Gothic style, and it was once covered by a bronze statue that was on top of it, and then later another statue replaced that one, but both of them are completely gone now. It's thought that they were taken down and melted down to scrap metal and used in World War II, but nobody really knows. The missing statues themselves aren't enough to put this thing on the iceberg though. There's also the fact that the Breyman brothers had a connection to secret societies like the Masons that actually might have had something to do with how the fountain was decorated and where it was placed in the city. Some of the carvings and patterns on the fountain have been linked back to like Masonic images. Some people also say that the fountain's exact location is where it is because it forms a perfect invisible triangle between that and other Masonic buildings in the city, like the city capitol and the Masonic Lodge. Some even think that the fountain itself contains a cipher within its decorations that can be solved to find some buried treasure or something like that. Regardless of all that, the fountain is a piece of history, so obviously there's going to be at least a little bit of mystery tied to it. The Toxic Lady refers to the death of 31-year-old Gloria Ramirez, in which her body emitted fumes so toxic that most of the medical personnel working on her passed out, with some even being hospitalized for weeks. Gloria Ramirez was only 31 years old, but she suffered from severe stage cervical cancer, so her outlook on life was pretty bleak. On February 19th, 1994, she was rushed to the hospital for severe heart palpitations. Medical staff noticed that her skin had a very oily sheen on it. She had a very strange garlicky odor coming from her mouth, and in her blood was little manila colored crystals, and it smelled like ammonia. As the nurses started giving her treatments, these things fully fleshed out. Like, that's when some of this stuff actually started happening, like the crystals in the blood, stuff like that. That's when people started passing out also. In just 45 minutes, Gloria tragically passed away, but over 23 medical personnel that were working on her passed out in what people thought back then to be mass hysteria, but boy were they wrong. Probably. After her death, they waited a few days to do an autopsy on her so it could all like air out and stuff like that. But what they found whenever they did was very controversial. The Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory investigated the case, and they came up with the theory that Gloria was self-supplementing a chemical known as dimethyl sulfoxide. Now, this dimethyl sulfoxide, also known as DMSO, was thought to slow the progression of cancer as well as help with pain and inflammation. You'll never guess what the most common and available form of this DMSO was, though. Industrial degreaser. Back then, the people that thought that this stuff would actually help you said that you would apply it to your skin, which would explain why Gloria's skin was oily. It also leaves your internal components with a horribly garlicky odor, which would explain that. As for the feigning and ill medical personnel, this was also probably the culprit. When paramedics gave Gloria oxygen, it would combine with this DMSO to form DMSO2 or dimethylsulfone. This chemical is known to crystallize at room temperature, which would explain the manila colored crystals in her blood. Finally, the defibrillator, which was used to shock her back to life, even though it sadly didn't work, would have changed this DMSO2 to DMSO4. DMSO4 or dimethyl sulfate is a highly toxic gas that would absolutely knock out the medical personnel. Now, nobody holds this against Gloria because she was a young woman who was dying, who was trying to do anything she could to just save her own life, which you cannot blame her for. Whether all this actually happened the way that the laboratory said it did or not, we really don't know, but we can theorize this is probably what happened. Either way, that's the story of the Toxic Lady. If you want a more in-depth explanation of this, Wendigoon did an awesome video on it. You can literally just search Toxic Lady Wendigoon and you can find it. It's worth a watch. Bobby Dunbar was a 4-year-old boy who disappeared during a family fishing trip in 1912 in Louisiana, only to seemingly be found 8 months later in Mississippi. In 1912, the Dunbar family went on a fishing trip to Swayze Lake whenever their son Bobby disappeared. They were wealthy, so they organized massive search parties with huge rewards to search for Bobby, but nobody ever found him. 8 months later, police believed to have found him traveling with a man named William Walters in Mississippi. Walters claimed that the boy was actually named Bruce Anderson, and he was the son of a single mother named Julia Anderson, and she gave William temporary custody of the boy. Julia Anderson backed this story up, but the authorities still believed that this boy was Bobby Dunbar. The boy was really too young to know anything or do anything about this situation, so the police took him to the Dunbars and they welcomed him with open arms. Some say that even the Dunbars were unsure if this was actually Bobby, but they took him in anyway, and William Walters was still thrown in prison for kidnapping. He was eventually released following a campaign by Julia Anderson for his release and the return of her son Bruce Anderson, but the boy, who was thought to be Bobby Dunbar, stayed with the Dunbars forever. He lived as Bobby Dunbar until the day he died, but in 2004, his granddaughter Margaret decided to seek the truth. Using modern DNA testing, it was found and confirmed that this Bobby Dunbar was actually Bruce Anderson, the son of Julia Anderson. This is a tragic tale of one boy, Bobby Dunbar, disappearing forever, and it changed the course of two families' histories forever because Bruce Anderson lived as Bobby Dunbar, and the Anderson family was probably devastated. It's also tragic for the Dunbars because they never actually knew what happened to their Bobby. This wasn't him. The Mad Gasser of Mattoon was the culprit behind a series of gas attacks in Mattoon, Illinois in the 1940s. These attacks apparently caused temporary paralysis, vomiting spells, coughing spells, stuff like that, but it never left anyone dead somehow. The very first report of this gas attack was on August 31st of 1944 when a man named Urban Rafe smelled a funny smell in his house and suffered from a fit of vomiting. Right after he started his fit, his wife decided to go and check the stove to see if there was a gas leak coming from that was causing him to throw up, but she realized she couldn't even get up. She was paralyzed from the waist down. Many similar cases popped up over the next few weeks in Mattoon, including some in which a tall, thin man was spotted in and around the homes that were attacked. This was the Mad Gasser. It said that he carried a flit gun, which was an agricultural tool that was used to spray pesticides, which would have been how he expelled the gas. The media ran with the story of the Mad Gasser of Mattoon, and obviously more and more cases popped up after this. It was mass hysteria at this point. There were also inconsistent symptoms among the victims of the gasser, so it's like nothing was the same. It was all just craziness. Most people believe that this hysteria was due to the World War II rationing and all the stresses that were going on in the country as of this time. Or there could have been one or two real gas attacks and the rest were all mass hysteria. Some people also believe that major pollutants were coming out of factories that could have caused the smell and the random symptoms, but once again, we'll probably just never know what the truth behind the Mad Gasser was. Dennis Martin was a 6-year-old boy who disappeared from a Father's Day camping trip on June 14th, 1969. The Martin tradition was to take all the men of the family, namely Dennis, his older brother, his dad, and his grandpa, into the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee for a weekend camping trip. During the trip in 1969, Dennis disappeared into a hiding spot in which he was going to jump out and scare somebody, only that he never jumped out and he was never seen again. His dad searched the trail for 2 miles without finding him, and the park rangers established a massive search party to look for him. Over 1,400 people participated in the search, including the National Guard and the Green Beret, but they never found him. Some people believe that this massive search party actually hurt the search because there were too many people out there obscuring the evidence. They could never actually find him. The most obvious theories as to what could have happened to him are that he got lost and wandered around aimlessly until he eventually perished, or he could have been taken out by some of the local wildlife. There are wild hogs, copperheads, bears, bobcats, and other stuff out there in the woods, so there's really no telling what could have gotten him. He was just 6 after all. Another theory is tied to an eyewitness named Harold Key. He and his family were about 5 miles from the spot where Dennis vanished from that day. That same day, he heard a horrifying scream in the woods, and a few minutes later, he saw a shaggy man who was trying not to be seen, carrying something over his shoulder walking through the woods. People believe it could have been Dennis and he could have been abducted and he was never seen again. Another theory says that something more sinister might have been going on, because how often does something like an elite military unit like the Green Beret get involved in something like this, like a search party? That's kind of crazy. We may never know the truth behind it, but Dennis has been missing for 56 years. So honestly, we probably never will. Lizzie Borden was a woman who lived from 1860 to 1927 in Fall River, Massachusetts. On August 4th, 1892, her father and stepmother, Andrew and Abby Borden, were brutally murdered by way of an axe, and the leading suspect was none other than Lizzie Borden. Alright, for some background. Lizzie's mother died, and her father, Andrew, remarried Abby, who Lizzie and her sister Emma believed married him for his money. At the time of his death, Andrew's estate was worth about $10 million modern dollars. The sisters did not like Abby, and this caused tensions between their father and Lizzie and Emma. They moved away from home, but they did return home to do stuff pretty much all the time. On August 4th, Andrew was stabbed 11 times by a hatchet, and Lizzie was who found the body. She called out to Abby to come check out the situation, but she never came. Upstairs, Abby was found stabbed to death by a hatchet. She was stabbed 19 times. Upon being confronted by the police, Lizzie said she was in the barn looking for something, and she never heard any screams or anything going going on. She only found the bodies when she returned from the barn. She did do several sketchy things over the next few days though. Her story was inconsistent. She was way too calm after finding her father and stepmother brutally murdered, and she burned a dress that was stained with paint. This sketchy behavior, combined with the fact that she was known to have hated her father and stepmother these days, led the police to indict her and bring her before a jury for double homicide. The police never found the murder weapon or anything like that, so they had no definitive evidence to prove that she did it, even though she was seen burning a dress that was probably bloodstained. Lizzie was an avid churchgoer, and nobody in the community really thought that she could commit a double homicide, so the jury found her not guilty. She lived out the rest of her days basically ostracized from the rest of the town because people didn't trust her after that, but she lived rich. Her and her sister Emma inherited the entirety of Andrew's estate, which was worth over 10 million modern dollars. So, did she do it? Probably. If not, it was probably Andrew's live-in maid named Bridget, who he was known to be extremely cruel to. Either way, Lizzie was the subject of tons of controversy, and the murders were never truly solved. The Sodder children were 5 children who seemingly didn't escape a house fire that destroyed the home of the Sodder family. George and Jenny Sodder had 10 children, and on the night of December 24th, 1945, their home burned down with them and 9 of their 10 children inside. Of the 9, 4 escaped with their parents, and the remaining 5 were thought to have perished in the fire. However, none of their bodies or bones were ever found, despite the fact that the entire house was destroyed and the rubble was easy to dig through and find stuff in. As a result, George, Jenny, and the other 5 children always thought that these 5 that were presumed dead were actually kidnapped instead of burning alive. There were plenty of other factors as to why they might think that these children were kidnapped, including the fact that this fire was probably arson. The Sodders received a strange phone call. They heard something thud and hit the roof, and then the house caught fire, and their phone line was cut so that they could not contact the authorities. Pair this with the fact that George Sodder was an Italian immigrant who had many enemies within their community because he vehemently opposed the Italian leader Benito Mussolini's rule, and it's very likely that something like this was the case. George and Jenny and myself believe that this fire was used as a sort of smokescreen. See what I did there? To kidnap the other 5 children. Later reports came from across the country to George and Jenny that they saw some of their children, and they followed up on every single lead, but they never found any of their children. So did the Italian mob burn down their home? Maybe. Did they or somebody else burn down their house to kidnap these Sodder children? Maybe. Was the fire simply caused by faulty wiring like the investigation said, and the children actually burned up in the house fire? Maybe. Go watch Nextpo's full breakdown on this case because it's incredible. Johnny Gosch was a 12-year-old paperboy who set off on his route on September 5th, 1982 in West Des Moines, Iowa, never to be seen again. Johnny was off on his route at 6 a.m. whenever neighbors saw him talking to a man in a car. He then disappeared and left his wagon behind. John and Noreen Gosch contacted the authorities almost immediately following his disappearance, but the police treated it as a runaway kid case instead of a missing persons case until 72 hours had passed. There were a few early leads that were unsuccessful, and even private investigators came up empty-handed. The police completely botched the investigation, and Noreen became an advocate for change. As a result, missing children are now immediately considered missing persons and given the highest priority. Johnny's picture was also one of the very first to appear on the side of milk cartons to spread awareness of missing children. Nobody was ever formally charged for the kidnapping of Johnny. No evidence ever really came to light. Nothing. In 1997, Noreen claimed that a 27-year-old man came to her and claimed to be 27-year-old Johnny and said that he had been kidnapped all those years ago. They talked. He told her the story of how he was abducted by a ring of child touchers, and then he disappeared, never to be seen again. Johnny's dad did not believe that this encounter happened at all. She had no evidence that this encounter happened at all, and according to John, all those years ago, the disappearance of Johnny drove her mad. The two divorced in 1993. So despite the law enforcement reform, nothing came from this case except for heartbreak, a broken family, and an abandoned little wagon. The Sunset Limited derailment occurred when an unknown saboteur sabotaged the train tracks of the Sunset Limited in 1995, killing 1 person and injuring 78 others. The Sunset Limited was on a course from Miami to Los Angeles carrying 248 people whenever it crossed a dry riverbed and suddenly derailed. It was first believed to be a freak accident until investigators discovered that the tracks had been shifted into a dangerous position by somebody. They were also still connected to the rest of the tracks via wire so that electronically nobody could tell that the tracks had a problem. This meant that whoever did this knew trains and they knew what they were doing. This was professional sabotage. At the scene, police found letters criticizing the US government for their recent overreach and the horrible stuff that happened at Ruby Ridge and the Waco siege. They claimed to be part of a group known as the Sons of the Gestapo. Investigations continued for years, even containing a $310,000 reward for any information for the situation, but nothing was ever found. It was likely that this was a case of domestic terrorism completed simply to protest the FBI and ATF's overreach and everything they did in those times, because it was bad. The government was absolutely not innocent in any of these situations, but you can't do that. You cannot commit domestic terrorism. That's insane. The FBI still considers the Sunset Limited derailment case to be active, so if you think you can crack it, be my guest. Speaking of guests, you can be mine and check out the first video of this series linked on screen now. I think I'm gonna go dig deeper into that derailment and claim that $310,000 for myself. Peace.